Welcome to this week's Tech Insights. My name is Nathan Lesnowski. I'm Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer, and we're today talking about Power BI data governance. This is a huge topic, lots of interest in it, and we're going to get started with a fantastic guest today, and that is Stephen Campbell. Stephen Campbell is coming to us from the United Kingdom right now. He is a Concurrency consultant who is over there for a little bit of extended trip. And I think he's out of quarantine now. He is a senior data and AI analyst, and he is here to talk a lot about Power BI data security and governance. Welcome, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited for this, and it's a really great topic, I think.
Awesome. So let's kick her off. So today we're going to be talking about a couple things in relationship to Power BI data governance. First is we'll talk a little bit about the data maturity curve and where companies find themselves on it and why it's important to this topic. We'll also talk a little bit about data governance in general and what it includes for Power BI and the influence of Synapse on Power BI and on data governance in respect to the modern data framework. What we want you to do with it, we want you to get started with Power BI data governance. We want you to get started with not only using Power BI in your environment, but learning how to do it in an appropriate and managed and governed way that enables the right people with the right information at the right time. So let's start by talking a little bit about the analytics maturity curve. When we think about what makes a successful organization in this space, there's a couple different qualities that I think we've seen in the progression of an organization from very entry level to someone that's really making an impact. On the lower left-hand corner, you can see an organization that looks like a lot of the companies that may be on this call, and in parts, it looks like something that happens within most organizations. It's the manual data collection and manual data work that we do with things like Excel and other tools that cause us to export data from one place, import it to another place, do something with it, and surface that data for visualization purposes and for analysis purposes. And what a lot of companies have been doing is they've been taking some of this data and they've been saying, you know what, I want to get better at this. I want to improve where I am so I can make better decisions. And they've started to move to this second spot. And they've done so in a couple different ways. Maybe they've started to surface that information with Power BI, but it's still manual Excel data. Like I'm exporting it from some system, I'm connecting it to Power BI, I'm surfacing it so I can get better visualizations and for me to be able to surface and understand that data better. Great. That's a huge step forward in your ability to understand your data. Some companies have historically already moved to a traditional data warehouse. You have a data warehouse on premise where you're doing ETL, you're pulling data from a variety of different data sources, putting it into a legacy data warehouse model, and then you're connecting it to Power BI and surfacing that information for you to make intelligent decisions. Or maybe you're a little bit less mature than that and you're using things like SSRS and other platforms. In that scenario, what you're really losing is speed to market of data, ability to handle lots of data versus where these traditional data warehouses they really struggled to be able to handle huge quantities of data that are important to our modern approaches today. So where a lot of our customers are trying to achieve is stepping over that first step and hitting a point where they're operating within a modern data framework. And Stephen's going to talk a little bit about what that looks like and what it means to governance as we go forward. Really, the modern data framework's goal is to facilitate understanding that historical view and forward view of our data, but do so in a way that leverages modern techniques and facilitates quick speed to market of the data so then we can do other things with it using cloud consistent models, not necessarily lifting all the data at once to that position, but positioning ourselves as an organization to be able to do something meaningful with it. On top of that, we then start using that data in really interesting ways. Machine learning, bringing wisdom and optimization to data through prescriptive guidance, not just predictive, but prescriptive guidance on top of what we've predicted, and then bringing that fully into scenario modeling and forward decision making that we're making on the data to be able to say, not only do I understand what happened in the past, but now I'm predicting what's going to happen in the future. I'm telling the business what they should do, and I'm even connecting that to a story of what our future state will look like. And that's all built upon data that needs to be governed, because When you start doing things other than just looking at historical data and trying to understand what happened in the past, and you're really guiding the business to make its decisions, the quality of your data, the security of your data, who has access to it, what you're positioning to be able to make decisions is critical to understanding then how we carry that forward into those future pieces, much more so than just looking at historical data scenarios. So our analytics maturity curve is really important to understand in respect to why governance is important quality for our conversation today. So let's move into that conversation with Stephen Campbell. So Stephen, why don't you start by talking about what is the modern data framework and what does it contain?
Yeah, so this is a great point here. I think, when we're looking at especially Power BI governance, what we're talking about is data governance as a whole. This traditional kind of data platform we have here. Each of these steps is going to get you towards this presentation layer at the end, where we're looking at this storytelling. We're looking at the predictive and prescriptive analytics. Now, that's a lot of what the end business users see. Really, there's this whole big data platform behind it. And there's a lot of work that goes into that and a lot of moving pieces here. So kind of what we see on the screen now is that traditional Azure data platform. You'll notice we have the Power BI, on the right here, and this is our final output, what the business users love to see, the analytics. But then there's real kind of 5 main steps. So obviously you have your source data, right? Everything starts with some data. Now this could be telemetry, real-time streaming data. It could be databases on your on-premises data. It could be anywhere your data starts. So obviously we have to start that. Now, once we get this data, we go through 4 main steps to get it to the Power BI. The first being this load and ingest step here. And the data can kind of go through what we like to call 2 paths. You'll see the speed layer or the hot path at the top. This is that real-time data. This is data that needs to be streaming. Often things like factories, we want to see if there's a problem on the factory line, we need to see this instantly. We can't see this in a day or 2. This has to be to the minute. And then we get what we call, our cold path or the batch layer. And this is that data we're going to take it out of all these systems. We're going to put it somewhere. Then we can do some really cool stuff to it. We can do machine learning on it. We can do trends and then see how our business is performing. And, hopefully influence us to make our business do better in the future. So here in the Azure Data Platform, that load and ingest, that first stage, really that means we want to get our data and take it out of whatever there is. This is the extract, transform, load, or an extract, load, transform kind of process. This is extracting it. This is, getting our data from wherever it is, all these different sources we have, taking it out. So, there's a couple of Azure resources here. You have an event hub for kind of real-time streaming data, or data factory if we have data which comes from more traditional sources. And Data Factory is a really easy to use, low code, no code solution to kind of extract this data. So after we've extracted that data, we've got to think, where do we want to put it, right? The store layer. Now we need somewhere to keep this data. And this is for that data that we're going to be storing. We're going to be doing stuff to it and kind of using in the future. Now this is, there's 3 kind of services here. There's a few more in Azure. We're not going to list them all, but this is the traditional Azure kind of storage. This is what's been around for the last few years here. We have things like a data lake where you can put a whole load of data. It's called a data lake, which can really store massive amounts of data. You have typical structured data sources like a SQL database. Azure SQL is very familiar with SQL Server. I think a lot of people are familiar with these type of structured databases. But you can also have unstructured data. Maybe we have pictures, maybe we have sound files, data which doesn't follow a traditional table format. We can put those in services such as blob storage. Now I think this gets that really cool part where we process this data. This is now the level which really says we're going just from getting our data showing that historical, just showing what we had, kind of taking it to the next level. This is where we apply, the features that can do machine learning, the predictive and the prescriptive analytics. We have a whole bunch of tools in Azure. Databricks is one of the new ones, which supports custom machine learning, supports Python languages like this. Otherwise, we have Azure Machine Learning Studio, Cognitive Services. Cognitive Services contain pre-built machine learning models. If your company isn't big enough or doesn't have a data scientist, you can take advantage of pre-built models, meaning you don't need to know how to actually design these machine learning models yourself. You can just train them using your data and still benefit from machine learning and predictive and prescriptive analytics. And of course, we have analysis services where we can take KPIs, generate DAX measures to get feature extraction and get important bits of information out of our data. In the hot part, we have stream analytics, which is the stream analytics we can pass our real-time data through. Then we get to the serve portion, and this is really where we've done all this cool stuff to the data, we've stored it, we've put some of our machine learning models, we've taken some of that data back to the database. Now we want to show it off. Now we want to give it to the rest of the business, use these insights to get there and to enhance our business. And typically the focus today, we're going to focus on Power BI here, which is a very, very powerful tool. And again, the reason we go through all of this is when we're thinking about data governance, we've got to realize Power BI is not a visualization tool. It's not a data extraction tool. It's really part of this process. It's a cog in this whole data platform. And when we're talking about governance, when we're talking about Power BI, we've got to understand all the steps that go into it, how they work together. Now, this kind of seems a lot of different tools you have to learn, a lot of things here. Which welcome to Synapse. Synapse Analytics is a new, fairly new service offered by Azure. Originally, it just replaced the SQL data warehouse as a storage. But as it's maturing, we're having things like Synapse Studio, Synapse Analytics, which is really combining all of these tools into a single platform, a low-code and no-code interface. And you can see here, we've really changed all those steps, making this a lot easier and a lot simpler for us to manage all our services. We still have this storage layer, which is run off a Data Lake Gen 2. And this is, top of the line Azure storage. But all these different familiar features that we're used to, such as Data Factory, Databricks, machine learning, now all come under one umbrella under this analytics, the Synapse Analytics. It uses Apache Spark, which is a very powerful distributed language here, and SQL. It's run off SQL language, so those familiar with SQL, you can still interact with your data in the same way. It really bridges that gap of having your data, querying your data, and then doing machine learning analytics of it, and it brings it all together. We also have Data Factory integrated into it. So when we are connecting to our data and moving it, it's all part of the same program. We're all under the same umbrella here. So everything's interjoined. And a lot of this stuff is a low-code, no-code interface. And then obviously, after we're done with this, we can still serve it, have all these analytics, and serve this to Power BI. So again, kind of how this Synapse Analytics replaces these 4 steps. We have these pipelines, which is the hybrid data integration. It's a hybrid integration, meaning we can connect to all the sources. We can use Data Factory behind the scenes in a low-code, no-code way. As I said, we can still use our T-SQL-based analytics. We kind of have different ways we can store this data. We use Spark. This is a very, very powerful language to do our machine learning. The great thing about this is Synapse Analytics is introducing low-code, no-code ways of doing this. This is running machine learning or advanced analytics in a way where you don't have to be writing pages and pages of code. And again, when we're looking at this, it's all under the same Synapse Studio. You can even integrate Power BI workbooks into the Studio and view your reports right there in the same area that you're integrating, you're processing your data. So on top of the Synapse, we talk a lot about the processing, but there's a lot of other things. We're not just using these resources, in isolation to the rest of Azure. We still have the same monitoring and best-in-class security that's available throughout Azure. Having these all under the same umbrella means that we can really integrate our security and our monitoring, a lot easier, instead of having to go to each of these sources and worry that we might have a weak link or a vulnerability somewhere. This is making it a lot easier to maintain and to monitor your services at once. So this was kind of an overview of what this Azure Synapse, the direction we're moving here, to really explain how to bring this all together.
Yeah, that was great, Stephen. Thank you for the overview on the, it's funny to say legacy or traditional Azure platform because it feels like an oxymoron, but the advancement not only from moving from the legacy data warehousing to the way that we would process and handle that within Azure, but now moving to an even more advanced form of that using Synapse. Can you talk about the experience of governing that data in Power BI and what controls we have at that point?
Yeah, definitely. So now that we've kind of gone over, Power BI, we're not just thinking of this visualization layer. It's just this whole approach and this whole process that we're going through. Now, when we are delivering our Power BI, we've really got to think about how we're delivering these end products, these reports, and kind of who has access, and still maintain security so that people shouldn't be seeing things that they aren't seeing. Yet at the same time, we want to give the people freedom to help build their own reports and really get that data in their hands as quick as possible. So when we're talking about governance of Power BI, the biggest overall thing we've got to think about is really our delivery approach. And there's three main approaches we have. We start on what I like to say, the business side on the left here. This is a more self-service, business bottom-up approach, where we let the business users have more access to the data. We let them build their own reports and models, and then we really give the power to the business side. This enables business users to build reports really, really quickly and get the data in their hand and do their own modeling. On the other side, we look at the far right here, the corporate BI. This is more traditional when we have IT control this process. If a user wants a report, they would submit a heat ticket or a request to IT. IT would then go and build a report for them. And what I quite like is this new way we're seeing, which is getting more common, and it's this IT managed blended business approach in the middle here. What this means is IT can still control the data. They can build the business models, and they control the behind the scenes of the KPIs, the modeling, the security. But you also open it up to the business to allow them to access these models quickly without having to request new reports. They can build the reports, but yet the data is still maintained by IT. Now, none of these are the best or the worst way. It really does depend on your size and the security of your data. If you have very secure and data that you can't let getting out, maybe you're financial and your employees can only see a very small amount of this data, you might want to go for the corporate BI approach. If you're a very small company and the data, you're not worried about who sees what data, maybe you have a few business analysts, much smaller, maybe you'll go for the business-led, more self-service. Or a lot of companies kind of go for this middle, where you still get to control the models, IT still gets to maintain the data, but the business sides then open up to really get that data in their hands very quickly.
Yeah, it seems like one of the bigger challenges companies can sometimes have is a lot of different versions of the same data based on who created the report. And by creating a managed approach to delivering the data, they can start to mitigate some of those concerns of, well, this was created by this guy over in finance, whereas this report was created by this guy in sales, and they were using different data to form different conclusions about the same subject. This gives a little bit more one version of the truth to the picture in
Right.
some cases.
And that's one of the biggest bits. And we'll go into this reusable data models to get that one source of the truth, which is a huge thing. You can't have people reporting the same metrics differently.
Mm-hmm.
So now thinking about kind of some of the things we think about when governing Power BI. You know, these are just some questions that you've got to ask yourself. Maybe we've picked an approach. Now we have some more questions to drill down into. You know, the first one, where is your data? Is it all in cloud, or do you have on-premises data? And this goes back to that data platform, that Synapse. And this is why this is important to understand this way on how you're going to get your data to a place where you can actually use it. If you do have on-premises data, you've got to think, you know, how do you refresh your data? Do you let users set up personal gateways to connect Power BI to on-premises? Or do you use corporate-wide on-premises gateways? And this gateway is really what Power BI connects to on-premises data directly. So you've got to think, is Power BI going to do this? How are we going to manage that? And of course, there's different things on how to connect. Power BI has two main ways to connect the data. You can either import the data into Power BI and then visualize it. The pros of this is you can do a lot of complex translations into the data. You can have KPIs and DAX. But again, you have then a refresh time. There's going to be a delay to your data because you're importing the data a certain amount of times a day. Or do you let Power BI connect directly to your data source? This is direct query. Now, this is good if you want quick data. You can't really do a lot of calculations off it. And you've got to think of your data source. Can it handle all these requests coming at it, you know, very quickly? Do you have a lot of users which are going to be sending a lot of requests? So these are the questions we're thinking about when we're setting up our data. And then again, exactly as we said here, this semantic models and shared data sets. You know, shared data sets allows IT users to create these models and these data sets. This creates one source of the truth. This really keeps those KPIs the same. And then you can actually allow your business users to connect to your data sets. So I can make a model in Power BI. I can make a data set. I can write all the DAX code to say, this is how sales is calculated. This is the business logic. My business users can then be shared with that model, and they can connect and use that model directly. So they're always using the same methodology that everyone else in the business. Exactly as Nate was saying, one source of the truth. So important to keep things level and keep everyone on the same page. And then you can control, you know, what users can see. We can use workspaces, app workspaces. In Power BI, we can share reports with different users. And beyond just sharing the full report, we have a row level security. And this can be a secure way to which rows a user can see. So you can share the same report with multiple users, but they will see different data because they're limited to seeing just information relevant to themselves. And one very cool thing is we have sensitivity labels. You can label your data sensitive so that when it's downloaded, when it's extracted, that sensitivity label stays with it, even when you take it out of Power BI, which is very important to keep users knowing that there is sensitive data. So again, we have this way where we have these different Power BI reports. We can group these into app workspaces to better share. Now, beneath these, we have these reusable data models. These data models are these different business calculations that are grouped together that run up data sets. Now, as a user, we'd like to connect as we move on. We can see a user will connect to Active Directory. They may have defined reports to share. They won't see every single report in our company. We've shared an app workspace and one report here. Then row level security restricts exactly which rows of the data set, the underlying data sets they can see. So there's two different ways we can secure the data. And inside this row level security, we can assign different roles for different users.
That's awesome. Thanks, Stephen. So we got about 5 minutes left. So let's go through a number of capabilities that Synapse brings to the table regarding data security and how it adds the things that you just talked about?
So there's a whole bunch of different data security. Here's quite a comprehensive list here. We'll touch on a few, but you can see, your data is always protected, whether it be in transit, at rest. This is world-class security. We have different access control to the data itself, and this is even stepping back a level from Power BI. Authentication is Azure Active Directory, world-class, best in practice Active Directory authentication. We can enable multi-factor authentication, just like you're familiar with Office 365. And again, we have advanced threat protection and network security. We can drill into a couple of these in a bit more as we go on. So another great, in terms of just restricting access, we also have dynamic data masking. We can see what's sensitive data, such as the example here being credit card numbers. Azure can actually apply data masking. So instead of just restricting a user from having access, we can create a mask so that these aren't displayed to users. You don't have credit card numbers, you don't have social security numbers popping up on screen. And again, as I say, we're always protected here. There's a lot of technical jargon here, but the main point being, we encrypt our data just not when it's stored in a database, when it's at rest, but also when we're moving it, when we're doing these data factories, when the data is moving from stage to stage, we know it's encrypted and protected as well when we're using Synapse. And again, one of the great things is that a lot of these security things have machine learning run in the background. There's automatic discovery. When you enter social security numbers, Dynamics will recognize that as a field. We can add these persistent sensitive data. So wherever your data goes, the data labels stay with them. And we can manage these and obviously audit and detect and have machine learning to see any unique or obscure detections that people have accessed this. If something looks odd, we have machine learning algorithms which will alert us to this and we can check it out.
Yeah, this is an area where I know a tremendous amount of effort is going from Microsoft to facilitate data labeling, classification, and applying security controls behind Power BI to the data that's sitting in these repositories. So this is a fantastic place of investment where you're going to see a lot more innovation coming out.
And again, this is something we might be familiar with if we're familiar with Azure and more at the admin side. We have these audit logs. This is kind of alerting us to things, what's happened, how it's accessed, events that have happened, and really used for investigating anything unique, doing general audits or tracking access to sensitive data. Stuff like that is all kept and all logged.
Awesome, that was great, Stephen, thank you. We're right at time, but I wanted to mention one thing before we close down, is to talk a little bit about how AI projects also factor into data governance. Sometimes we're talking so much about Power BI and its ability to visualize and be the mechanism to understand the whole life cycle of data through to the customer. Where artificial intelligence, both from cognitive services and machine learning, comes into play is that sometimes your machine learning data scientists and engineers are accessing data that you need to be able to prevent them from seeing or using certain types of data because it influences things like fairness and bias, that unless that data is prevented from getting to that point in the work stream, it can, without you even trying or intending to, can enter into bringing some of that bias or some of that fairness oriented data problems, or even just security of certain data that they shouldn't be using to be able to create models, is potentially causing some problems downstream. So some of the topics we're talking about, like data masking and preventing people from being able to access certain data if they're not warranted to access that data, are super important as you're planning out your data model and as you're leveraging platforms like Synapse. So think about that in the context of some of the things that we've gone through so far, and how the questions that you think about in terms of Power BI get magnified when you think about applying these into AI and predictive models that bring even greater concern of how you use data at the table, especially because it's applying straight into how the business is making intelligent decisions to do things about either increasing supply, changing the supply chain, changing the demand process, interacting with a customer, asking a customer a question that maybe should or shouldn't be asked, things of that nature. So think about the AI in this context as well. It brings a whole life cycle of information that that magnifies this and makes it even more important. Awesome. So that was a great 30 minutes. Thank you to Stephen for taking the time to go through both the understanding of what the modern data framework look like and what Synapse looks like in that context. We're going to have a really cool conversation next week. Prior to that, we'd love to have a one-on-one conversation with you about Power BI and data governance. Now is a great time to do that. It's a great time for us to be talking about the subject with all the new technology coming out. Do not miss our conversation next week on AI for Good. We are going to be talking about a really interesting project that we did helping individuals with cognitive disabilities. And we're going to talk about the exact technology that we use to do it and the fact that now it's open source and you can use that technology to do your own for good projects. So do not miss that next week. It's one of the most exciting things that we've experienced and done in the community in the last year. And I know it's exciting that people have been impacted by it. It's going to be really interesting for you, especially in the data community. Don't miss it. See us next week on AI for Good. Also visit our videos and blogs on concurrency.com. And again, thank you for joining us this week on Concurrency's webinar, and especially to Stephen for taking the time to help us with this content. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks so much.